Hung?
Are we live? Okay, great. So here we are with another episode of Tell Me I'm Wrong. Welcome, everybody. This is the only place on the internet where you can have a rational debate on a contentious topic in recruiting. So today I'm with my co-host Stephen O'Donnell, and our two special guests today are David D'Souza.
If anyone is having a problem hearing Hung speaking,
I think it's only you, Steve. But never mind.
Hung was just trying to welcome everyone. I can see that we've got a whole load of people on the right-hand side. Hung is our host for the day, but with his audio going in and out, and mine probably going in and out as well, then hopefully between us we can finish a whole sentence. So,
Stephen, I think it's only you, to be honest with you. I believe you're the only person that can't actually see or hear. But that's okay.
Is this the start of the argument?
We started contention straight away on this. But no, I think we're fine, Steve. But drop me something on Facebook if that's not happening. But anyway, quick info with David D'Souza. He's the head of something engagement in CIPD. Is that right, David?
Yeah, I look after our branch structure, and I also look after London as a region. So I'm head of London, which isn't even called the title.
Okay, and CIPD, remind everybody what that institution is, David.
We're the professional body for HR and people development. So we've got 140,000 members, and we also do a lot of public policy work.
Yep, fantastic stuff. And we're also joined, of course, by Joanne Ward of Winter Court Consulting. Joanne, thanks for coming on the show. Can you give us a quick strapline as to what Winter Court's all about and what you do for them?
Yeah, what we do, we're a small boutique agency, well, not agency. We go in and help startups establish recruitment processes, teach them how to do it. So they start with the right tools to do the job to successfully grow and scale without making the same old mistakes that everyone else has learned.
Fantastic stuff. Okay, so today's topic, guys, is going to be I can hire anybody I bloody want. So this is the idea that managers should have the right to actually recruit whoever they want within their businesses without interference from government, without interference from the media or anybody else. It's your business. You can recruit who you want. Stephen, you're going to make the case for that. So why don't you go ahead and say your piece, sir?
Thank you very much, Hung. Yes, as a hiring manager, as a business owner, I can hire anyone and the one that I want. How would job seekers feel if employers were compelled to only recruit the quantifiably, measurably, and definitively best candidate for each job? When you go along for an interview, you hope you're the best candidate. You don't know who you're up against. But what you're banking on also is that in the interview, even if you're not on paper the best candidate for the job, you can somehow win them over. You can somehow be the person that they like better. And as an employer, I want to have the discretion to the one that I get on with better. If I don't hire the person who, on all of the measures, isn't the best person for the job, if the best person, frankly, is annoying the hell out of me, then I want to not hire that person and hire the person that I get on with best. If the person I get on with best happens to support my favourite football team, if the person that I get on with best happens to look like me, an old white guy from Glasgow, so I want the discretion to at all times have the ability me best. Now, as an employer, I've always had a preference for oddball candidates who are unusual or hidden gems or rough diamonds where other employers would tend to steer away from them. So I can see huge benefits. Someone who doesn't have the paper qualification, but someone who has the personality traits that I'm looking for. But if someone had a job and afterwards saw who I did hire and said, well, I'm absolutely better than that person, why did you hire them? Then I want to have the discretion, the one for me, and to hell with anyone who says otherwise.
Stephen, thank you very much for that. You did drop in and out a little bit on it, but I managed to capture some notes on this. So I'm going to basically repeat your points so that everyone's clear on what that is. You correct me if I've got you wrong on this. And then I'm going to go to David and he's going to explain why these points are not right. Okay,
Yeah.
so number one, which is I thought was very interesting. Basically, you said that it gives candidates a chance.
Yes.
So hang on, you've got all of these super objective. Let's imagine a world where everything was objective, and you could absolutely measure who was the best fit for the candidate, which we all assume, best
Yes.
candidate should get the job. But actually, doesn't that mean that certain people will always fail to get that job because they haven't been able to negotiate their way in? It's almost like the dystopia of a true meritocracy, isn't it? Someone wrote a good book about that, but actually a meritocracy may not be what we imagine. That's a very interesting point. Second point you mentioned was that objective measures are ipso facto unfair anyway. So we've created these artifacts that we assume are fair, but of course they're full of bias anyway. And we're just kind of creating a biased method of trying to be fair, if that makes any sense. If that's not a too roundabout way of putting it. But you're basically saying, look, we are not good enough as assessors to actually be objective, so you might as well go with manager's discretion. And the third point you made was actually manager's bias. Let's accept we're biased, but the manager's bias will actually impact that person's performance, even if he or she did get the job. So if I was a racist manager and I was forced to hire someone who I was racist against, you know what? I'm going to make it's inevitable that guy's going to have a hard time. And he's going to be a poor performer, and no one's going to have it.
I should point out that I absolutely recognise the lead individuals and protected groups that you cannot and absolutely must not describe the discretion to exercise choice beyond that.
Sure, but I would say that's a kind of a gradient beyond what we're talking about here. But what you're saying is actually the manager's preferences does make a difference. Using your football team's example, and okay, the final point you mentioned, which I think we'll go to David after this, is that discrimination overall, if you take it beyond the individual example, might actually balance out. So in other words, if you had like 1,000 managers and all of them were discriminatory in slightly different ways, then generally speaking, you know, people are going to find the right fit somehow. Yeah. So anyway, those are the four major points, which I've got notes on it on my phone here. So David, I'm going to go to you first. Tell Stephen why he's wrong. Why is this bollocks, mate?
Well, I don't think he's entirely wrong in every way, but I think that where he leads to, his conclusions aren't inevitable. To be fair, so I think the idea that discrimination or even kind of unhealthy practices balance out if done at a macro level, I think we see in just about any dimension of reporting, be it from things that are explicitly protected characteristics, so things like race or gender identification, right the way through to more nuanced things like social class. We know that actually we don't have that level of mobility and things don't end up in that perfect world just by evening out. Reversing back into kind of the racism bit, which is an extreme case, but you know, if you have a racist manager and they are only prepared to work with one type of person, that's the problem with the manager. That's not a problem with the hiring process. We're looking in the wrong place there. And if what we're saying is we would permissibly allow people's biases to play out in such a profound way that it impacted people's lives, that's a really unhealthy thing. As for the fact that, you know, nothing can be perfect objectively, that's fine, but you strive to get better at that. You don't abandon that and step away from it. So if we're in a position where we're saying that you're never going to get recruitment 100% right 100% of the time, so therefore it's okay for us to allow more of ourselves to creep into it, that effectively destandardizes the process for the people going through it and makes the chances of unfair decisions where you don't get the best candidate to happen more often. Now, I would absolutely agree with Stephen that there is space in a process for whether you think of it as team fit, cultural fit, the ability of people to have good social relationships. All of that is part of the working environment and part of being productive. And I think that should be integrated into a process, but that is a far cry, or it is at least a different dimension to, I can just hire anyone I like and anyone I get along with. Because if you are after the best candidate, there are some things around their capability, their potential, their skills base, and the way they interact with others that you want to have measured as far as you can through a fair process.
No, but David, isn't the last point exactly Stephen's point? How they get along with others. Like you may have a great candidate, he's great in every other level, but actually he doesn't get on with the manager that's gonna hire him. Therefore, that has to be a factor as to whether he's the best candidate, doesn't it?
It has to be a factor, but actually you need to delve down a level underneath that and start thinking about why don't they get on with that person. So if it's because actually, you know, it could be religious difference, or actually I'm more comfortable talking to men, or, you know, I want to have a mate to go down the pub with, they're not valid reasons for ignoring someone else's potential contribution. Sometimes it's about us getting better as managers and leaders in the diversity of people that we can support and will lead, rather than just saying, actually, if you don't fit the type of person that I'm comfortable with, you can't come and work here. Well, one brings you to diversity and inclusion. The other brings you to an increasingly narrow set of cloned behaviours.
Yeah. So Stephen, are you there, or have we lost you, mate?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I think we can hear you, but your video's gone, so that's okay, mate. So anyway, that's very good contribution, David. Lots of good points there. I think a strong rebuttal, really, of a lot of points that Stephen made. We're going to go back to Steve to allow him to respond to that. But let's go to Joe first. On those 4 points, just to repeat them, Joe. Number one, it is actually meritocratic in a strange way, because it gives the candidates that aren't quote unquote objectively the best a shot at negotiating their way in an interview. Objective measures are flawed anyway, so why are we just putting them in there, making ourselves feel better that we're doing the right thing, when in fact we're just putting on a different layer of bias. Thirdly, manager's attitude is going to impact bias anyway. It's wishful thinking to assume that is going to go away. You have to accept that this is what that guy is. And finally, discrimination balances out over a wider framework, wider number of people. So let's go through that.
Right, you did me all four. Okay. Straight away, I forget the first one. I hate being done in order. I guess the first thing I'd say is coming back to the leadership thing. You know, I mean, your first basic management training, decent any course, is about rapport building and team building, and building teams. You need balance. You need diversity of opinions, different opinions. Otherwise, you're going to end up. So, the sort of the best candidate on paper, you can't define that. CVs are awful. They're the best we have. But how do you define what is the best? They are arbitrary measures at best. But you have to have filters. So to slavishly do that, so they should always be guidelines. But every person on paper, when you see them on person, is different. So I don't see how. I guess I have too much information coming at me. I go very logically in one step at a time, not 4 steps at a time. So
let's deal with the first one.
I will not be the best candidate in this environment.
Let's deal with the first one, Joe. I mean, I realise actually I have loaded it on both of you too much. So maybe let's deal with the idea that having basically allowing the manager to hire who he wants gives a certain type of candidate actually a fairer chance. Because, you know, they may be objectively
I think
a slightly worse candidate than, you know, who is the best in the market.
Well, I would say that I personally believe that Stephen's approach to I'm going to hire the more obscure candidate is actually in the minority. I think a lot of people are going to go for the safe, normal candidate, or the more common candidate for that role. I think Stephen's saying I want to give unusual people a chance isn't actually what most people would do in that situation.
And that's why I would chip in and say that education and training of managers to look for people out with the norm, that inbuilt bias and discrimination where they might play safe, and encourage them to take risks with candidates who have a lot of soft benefits.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I mean, one of the things we come up against, especially in the startup world, is a love of MBA graduates. You know, and we reward privilege of people going to the right schools, the right environment, and stuff like that. I think people go on a journey just because your starting point is more advanced. You've got to show where that goes. So in that concept, you're going to end up with lots of similar candidates if you're only going to go for people that have been to certain schools with certain qualifications.
Yeah.
So in that say I can hire people with that.
Yeah.
Because they feel it's playing it safe.
If an
I
organisation,
think it's
if a company had advertised the job saying we're looking for an MBA qualification as well as all this experience and so on, and could the other candidates have a case for saying, well, hold on a second, we've been discriminated against, or you said you wanted this, and turns out you didn't want that after all. You've chosen.
I think it's how, I mean, and that's where we go back to defining what we class as the best candidate for a role. And why did someone decide that person needed an MBA?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one example. And I think, this is why going into the process with a preconceived idea of the right person, you're bound to end up. That's kind of the wrong bit.
But hang on, isn't that how we recruit though? I mean, I get the aspiration of all of this, but if you're a manager, and we just drop ourselves into the role of a manager right now,
I've done that many a time.
They do have a preconceived that. Of course you do. You have an idea of what role this person's going to perform. That's a preconception. So, and then you're going to pull out a bunch of characteristics that you hope marry to good performance, and then you sort of create a model as to who it is you're looking for.
Because you're looking for filters to actually narrow down a field.
Right.
So yes, you are going to want. So again, depending on the role. I mean, we talk about so many industries trying to get it in one type of role for one conversation. So you have to have, if you need somebody to hit the ground running, you're going to need certain skills. But it's when you're going to the level of, does every job require someone to have a degree? What was it about a degree subject that enables them to do that job or not?
Yeah.
So
that I consider that to be more arbitrary. I know there's a belief that having gone through university, you may be, I don't know, able to drink a lot. It's for me, it's things like that. So I do believe if you're an engineer, you're going to need engineering skills and trade in that. So those are not arbitrary.
Yeah. It could be said in organisations where they say they want to hire a particular personality type and they assess people as part of the recruitment process for that personality type. It could be said that then to prioritise that personality type over others who are really well qualified for the job is a form of discrimination. What you're saying is that we and this, that and the other in terms of personality traits. But does that actually mean that they're good for the job, or is it just to fit in with the culture fit of this person? And is that discriminating against people who are better qualified for the job?
I think,
yeah, please.
Yeah. So I think part of the challenge is that we ask quite often organisations to do two things, or even people to do two things, which are quite hard to reconcile. And that's that we tell people to recruit for diversity, and then we also tell them to recruit for cultural fit.
Yeah.
And when you think cultural fit, you tend to think, okay, so what are the other people around here like? And when you think diversity, you tend to think far more broadly. And we don't reconcile those for people. We kind of hold them up. People stand on conference stages and go, you should do both these things. But they can be tricky. So, I've spoken to tech's a really interesting example.
Yeah.
It's really diverse because it's really welcoming, because we all go for a drink, after the pub afterwards, whatever that looks like. Well, actually, who's that excluding? And actually, if you were to really think about the breadth of people that you could recruit from or hire from, how would you do things differently, and how would things feel differently? So they're really tricky things. But yeah, I think do we discriminate against people based on character? Yes, absolutely. I think the important thing in this discussion is that there's a tiering of commitments, one of which is there are some legal things that you just can't do. And then there are some things that you could do that probably practically may improve your organization. And then there's an ethical commitment to diversity and inclusion beyond that, which some organizations decide to step towards.
Yeah. All right, let me just jump in here very quickly, David. I like this idea of tiering. And I just want to make sure I'm now imagining a framework I can maybe potentially use here. So there's a legal point, beyond which obviously different jurisdictions are going to be different, but you have to comply with this if you're going to be an employer. I get that. We can very clear. There should not be any controversy on that area of it. And then you're saying beyond that, there is this discretionary phase, but this is where ethics come in. Where you need to then apply an ethical standard, and it's kind of up to you as to whether you want to be a good guy or not. Yeah. There's the ethical standard. And can you help us draw that line? I mean, where does that kind of line occur for the UK at least?
So I think the legal stuff, and Joe's probably specialist area, so probably pass over to her. But the Equality Act outlines key protected characteristics that you can't discriminate on either indirectly or directly. So that's a bit that's not up for grabs. Then I think you've got a tiering where you can be slightly more nuanced in your recruitment thinking and go, there are probably untapped groups of people where we're not maximizing skills from. So actually we're going to divert attention there in our recruitment. And that can be because that will benefit the organization. Then you've got a third tier, which I call ethical commitment, which is we firmly believe that actually we should represent inclusion and diversity in everything we do, including our recruitment practice. So therefore we're going to go for a gold standard in this, and we will review everything we do the whole time. So there's legal, commercial, and then there's ethical at the top for me.
So on the ethical side, would you say that the business needs when it comes to hiring the right person, and does it come down to thinking about the smaller or the smaller picture being the immediate needs, or the bigger picture being the long-term benefit of the organisation and how you go about your business?
I think that's part of the conflict for most businesses, and I think there's a size issue and a phase of maturity as well. So if you're a giant conglomerate, it's a lot easier to step into the ethical space than it is if you are quite often still in startup. You have some immediate needs, and the easiest place to go and fulfill those needs are a group of people who may have quite consistent characteristics.
Yeah. On this note, I mean, I'm still imagining the gruff one-man band who's, he's driving a van or something. That's his business, and he wants to hire somebody. That's the business I'm thinking of. All of this type of stuff would make no sense whatsoever to him, I'm sure. So how do we address that with him? I mean, he's going to wouldn't his position be, listen, it's my business. Why are you telling me how to do my business? I'm paying the government tax. I'm doing what I'm doing. Everything's above the law. Why are you telling me I can't hire my cousin Bob, who I like?
So they wanted to hire a one-legged Spanish hermaphrodite, go and do so without fear of finger wagging.
Well, actually, just on this, before I sort of go back to Joe on this, but there is a size issue, isn't it? Isn't it above 50 sort of employees? When some of these laws start kicking in, and if you are a small business, actually some of these other stipulations don't apply. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. What do you think? Do you know anything about this, Joe?
Not exactly. I guess my majority of my background's actually in a very different culture from recruitment. I'm a relative novice, only 4 years in recruitment, so this side of the fence. But I think. You've got the legislation. Legislation is quite clear on when you look it up, and David is definitely Mr. Legislation, not me really. Although I could be seen to be a protected from both gender and disability. I'm a protected species. However, from an actual knowing the letter of the law, like anyone else, I'd probably Google whatever it was at the time before I was doing it if I needed to see what was current. Because if it's anything like the tax laws, it changes every 6 months. But I think whatever size of business you are, and the reason that one of the things that we so passionately believe in what we do at Wintercourt Consulting is to get people to change their thinking from day one. So they are thinking about the right type of person to do that particular job, especially in smaller businesses. Often you've got to do more than one type of job.
So would you say, Joe, the time you think about fairness and avoiding discrimination is long before
you have to?
Yes.
I don't think you should only start thinking about it once the legislation size of company kicks in. If that is the case, David, you'd have to, if that's the truth. I don't know if that is a fact. Yeah. I've only heard that from Hung. I don't think that's the approach to anything.
Have I just invented a law that doesn't exist?
I don't know. I've just never heard it before.
My understanding on the law, and again, I couldn't be quoted on it, is that there is number of employees above which you need to have the paperwork and be able to demonstrate that you're adhering to the law. The same obligation to be scrupulously fair, but the onus is what the numbers are. But that's my understanding.
Yeah, some of the reporting requirements vary by size.
Yeah.
But the actual commitment to the Act is universal, with the exception of a few kind of niche sectors. So if you're looking at something like sports, you can, if you think about contracts, constraints for that and things like that, it's a very different space. But if you are a normal employer, then yes, this applies to you. How you report on it may be different.
Yeah.
But
I know it's like, and that's but of course an agency, then you can absolutely be hiring on how good looking you are of crossing the line anywhere. But I think there's I'm only throwing that in, but it is a crazy thing to say. But some employers, like say Hollister or Gap, when you go in, it appears a catalogue, and there's got to be a bias going on in the interview process there. Jobs in those companies, or are only good-looking people being hired?
That's a very good point. In case anybody didn't quite get that, but I heard Gap, I heard good looking, and I know exactly what he's talking about. Basically, you walk into any retail store, actually, there's usually a good looking person under the age of 25 modeling the clothes in front of you. Now, okay, let's say I'm 40 odd plus, I'm definitely not good looking, I've got no sartorial sense. I apply for a job there and I don't get it. Is that manager right or wrong?
Wrong.
Yeah, so Gap would probably argue, or an organisation in that sector would probably argue that they attract a certain type of applicant, probably due to the nature of the work and probably due to the salary. If you were to want to work,
I don't care about who they attract. I mean, I've just been denied this job.
So what I'm saying is
fit profile and.
I'm happy to give you a job at Gap. Like,
I've got people campaigning for it on the chat here.
So they would probably say that potentially there isn't bias. But if you applied and the reason that you were given, or even the reason you suspected was due to your lack of good looks, lack of good looks wouldn't be protected. But if they went, you're obviously older and we like young, good-looking people, or actually we only like attractive females. They're the protected characteristics that you can get in there. So ugly, unfortunately, probably wouldn't be covered. But where that was linked to another characteristic, then yes, you would have a case.
Well, this is now a bag of worms. I'm now thinking things like Hooters. I mean, I don't think we have Hooters over here, but we have in the States very clearly. There's only firstly, you've got to be female. Secondly, you've got to present in a certain way. I mean, surely this is an example of a franchise hiring who the hell they can bloody want. I mean, what is their legal argument to say?
I think the legal argument is that they're hired effectively as entertainers. They come under the banner of entertainers.
Yeah, they're not serving. Actually, that's maybe something they do voluntarily. What they're there to do is to entertain. Got it. Okay. No worries. So where are we? I think I'm not sure.
You've got a job in Gap. You're curious about Hooters.
I'm going to apply. I need a bit of cash flow. So yeah, it is fascinating because I think the key thing is, look, where does the ownership of the decision lie? And it looks like, you know what, a manager. There probably is got to do something with the sort of the scale of the company, perhaps, before it starts being applied. But yeah, it looks like the manager perhaps doesn't have as much control as perhaps some people might assume. So there's a legal dimension there, which of course we can support with ethical arguments and so on.
And the legal dimension in the exemption is really important, because the other thing that small businesses would think that wouldn't apply to them would be things like the living wage. So there are lots of things that small businesses think happen in big businesses. Lots of them are applicable to all of them. They're just not aware.
Yeah. Certainly small businesses, but on the living wage, they think they can employ a member of the family and pay them less than the living wage, where, of course, the obligation is still there. It doesn't matter who it is.
Well, that is the Chinese restaurant experience. I mean, I'm speaking from personal experience here, but absolutely. I mean, there's an example of nepotism right there. But it's nepotism not really in a kind way. It's nepotism in there's this free labor. It's a difficult one because we see examples at that level, and also if you take it right at the very top at the White House, you know, did Ivanka Trump, is she drawing a salary? I don't know, but she seems to be getting involved professionally in some type of thing. Did she interview? Is she the best person for the job? Who knows, right? So it's hard, I think, to point the fingers at big or small when, you know, it goes up to the most visible organization on the planet.
Well,
That is hiring everyone. I mean, Trump would probably argue with Stephen here to say, I am the president, I'll hire who I want.
A significant number of our MPs actually employ members of their own family.
That's true, yeah.
It's only in the last election that practice has been stopped. So as long as they've registered it before the election was called, they're still absolutely fine to employ members of their family, normally or research roles.
I saw that Ivanka's husband mentioned yesterday that Kim Jong-un he was the only of his family connection. He's not even proper person that should be running North Korea, and without any hint of irony as to why he got the job in the White House.
Oh, this is Jared Kushner or somebody,
yes.
is it? Or yeah, absolutely.
Just on that topic of North Korea, of course, in North Korea, people don't get interviewed for jobs; people are assigned jobs.
That's true.
And so if I was saying something finally to wrap up here, which I'm gonna, then is a space where you are exercising of that discrete choice on who you prefer for the job, as opposed to the hard and fast qualifications for them. So yes, within certain boundaries, you are able to exercise your choice. Absolutely, grant that there's the legality and bigger picture involved. But before all of your discrimination comes to bear, all hiring managers should be trained on how to interview, what the responsibilities are to the organisation as a whole, and what the responsibilities are, the moral set of the organisation they're representing. Does that make sense?
Yep. I think that makes sense. As much as we can hear it, Steve. I'm afraid you dropped out about 50%. But I think just to summarise, it's all about the boundaries of where the manager can make the decision. So of course there's discretion. This is not North Korea where people get allocated jobs.
Yeah.
Managers need to make the call. However, there's certain areas where they have to adhere to, and of course for companies. All companies, ideally, regardless of size, you need to train the managers to think, as Joe's point initially early on in the chat, train managers to really change mindset about what good really looks like. All right, cool. I think that's about it for the debate. Thank you very much for the contribution. We're moving on to the next phase of this, which is 101. It's kind of a little segment we have. It's 101 is a room where we're going to throw in something in the recruitment world that we never want to see again. We usually go with Stephen first, but I'm a bit concerned that we can't see him on video, whether he's able to hear us. But Steve, if you're there, give us the 101. It's
a book. There are 3 words. No, what I'd like to throw into room 101 are crazy interview questions. Questions like, would you rather be blind or deaf? Crazy interview questions. Throw them into room 101. That's what I want to get rid of.
Why are they bad, Steve?
And they simply throw candidates on Obla. I don't like them, and they drive me crackers.
I heard that. I will throw this thing into 101 because I don't like them. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, moving on to David. 101, man. What is the thing that you're going to throw in there?
Recruiting wise, I'll go for job ads that have competitive salary, but no indication of what that salary is.
So you want transparent declaration of what the money is, yeah?
Yeah, for a few reasons. One, it saves, I guess, in the world, so many wasted conversations where there's a disparity between the expectation of the candidate and the reality. And quite often from JDs, it's very difficult to tell the seniority of the role. And secondly, I think in terms of things like the gender pay gap, the more that you are placing the emphasis on people to negotiate their own salary rather than be offered what they're worth, which should be indicated by the company, the more you'll continue to compound that offer. So I think it's a lazy way of organizations exploring with candidates what they think they can get them for, rather than valuing people to do the job.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's very valid. Go ahead, Joe. 101, what would you throw in?
Well, completely unprepared, which I don't do this very well. I hate video interviewing on jobs. and applications as part of the process.
Right. Interesting.
Absolutely, it's the one thing that I hate, and I have no justification for it, and no preparation and no expectation. So I just went with what I hate.
So basically, just a gut feel. Don't like it, yeah.
Gut feel off the top of my head, because Stephen took the one thing I hate the most.
That's fine.
The questions.
Good feel is the
It's gut
original.
feel, because I think we go back to your gap. I think we go back to your gap problem with how people are hired. I think it just encourages that kind of
discriminatory.
That's kind of where I.
Yeah.
Well, have you seen, even on that note, have you even seen some of the more kind of advanced technologies of these video interviewing tools, where they're starting to predict? It's almost like a phrenological approach to it, where they can predict, oh, this person's responses indicate he's going to be stealing out of the till. It's like, what?
It's nonsense. Yeah, some people perform better on camera and in this kind of environment. And as I've kind of mentioned, this is not my ideal medium. It doesn't mean I'm not good at jobs, but I'm a reflector, so I tend to need time to think before I respond on a lot of this stuff. I think that kind of means it does me a disservice. Can I do a job? Yes, I can.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. There's all of these assessments are just false tests, really, as to whether the person can truly do it. You're never going to know until that person's actually doing it. Yeah. All right, I think that's about it. I think there's one more thing we've got to do, and that's to give a big shout out to a big friend of ours, Johnny Campbell of Social Talent, who is 40 years young today. So big 40. Johnny, if you're watching this or listening in any way, happy birthday to you from all of the gang here at Recruiter Zone. And that's about it, I think. Steve, you got any last words, or do we just cut the mic here, or what?
One last word before we cut the cord. We have now gotten to a point where we have critical mass, I think, of hosts and shows on Recruiter Zone, and we now have a new website. So recruiter.zone has archives of all the old shows going way back, and an events calendar. This is a quite quiet time in the middle of the summer where people are taking breaks, but in the next couple of weeks there are going to be more shows coming on. But if you're anxious for your next fix of something from the Recruiter Zone, then go to recruiter.zone. Shows like this.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a brilliant website. Some genius developer put that together. It was amazing. So go check it out. Recruiter.zone. This is Tell Me I'm Wrong. I can hire anyone I bloody want. No, you can't, sir, is the answer to that. Okay, that's about it. So I think we'll be back next week, Thursday, 4 o'clock, British summertime. Thank you very much, people.
Bye-bye. Bye, Joe. Bye, Hung, and bye, everyone.